Brexit Britain to the world.
Leave means leave. How many times have you heard people say that? And all those people who argue that those people who voted leave in the referendum knew what they were voting for. They wanted to leave without a deal, and they still do. Those internet trolls with their 15 followers, normally, maybe 20 at a push, who think that the way to win an argument is to abuse people online. I've engaged in a few of those. Some of them have even found my email address. Had some of that this week. Leave doesn't mean leave for everyone. You'll be astonished to know, because now we have some numbers. Only 27% of the population want to leave without a deal. Of those who voted leave in the last referendum, 55% want to leave without a deal. We'll have more on that pretty soon on Balls Radio. Today, what happens next on Brexit? If there is a general election, what would happen? And if there was a second referendum, what would happen? And is Nigel Farage's Brexit party as big as Nigel Farage's ego? Or is that impossible? Because his ego is only slightly smaller than the universe, I think. He could probably survive the total perspective vortex. If you are a Hitchhiker's fan, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those unaware, the total perspective vortex in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a small chamber where you go into, and then you are made aware of the size of the entire universe, together with a microscopic dot on a microscopic dot that has the legend, "You are here," and the sense of perspective that is conveyed destroys your mind, because you realize just how insignificant you are. It's stated that the total perspective vortex is the only means of crushing a man's soul, but not for Zaphod Beeblebrox, who is the universe's biggest ego. Nigel Farage, I think he would survive too. But look, we'll look at whether he's right, that if there was another general election, whether the Brexit party would do as well as they did in the European elections. Also in the news today, W.H. Smith, worst retailer in the UK, says which survey? I wonder if they actually managed to get anyone to comment on that, or whether, well, I mean, they wouldn't, would they? Because they don't open till 10. And then would anyone issue a press conference, or would you have to go and get a press statement yourself, press a button somewhere, and it comes out with a discount voucher for printer cartridges? Because they are hopeless, aren't they? I don't get it. They started as a news agent. They don't open 9:30, I think, actually, in our town. That's the earliest they open. I thought the reason W.H. Smith existed because it was a news agent. The clue is in the title, but you can't get these newspapers to read over breakfast or for your morning commute. You can't get them till it's too late. They're selling old papers. I don't know. And they are combining W.H. Smith's in our town as well with the post office. Two of the worst experiences known to man combined to create new heights of ineptitude in the retail space. And Boots, news today that Boots is also closing stores, 200 of them, in a bid to cut costs. More could be on the way. How would life be without Boots? Unthinkable, isn't it? Perhaps they should merge with the post office. Now that would be something, wouldn't it? You'd still have to queue, of course, forever. And then get to the front, and then everyone would know what you're asking for. You know, when you're asking for your hemorrhoid cream and a first-class stamp to Spain. The only thing I get from Boots, I have to say, maybe this is why they're not doing very well, is hair gel. Yeah, I do have a bit of hair gel, just because it gets a bit frizzy otherwise. Costs £1. Lasts a long time, as you'd imagine, because I don't have much hair. So maybe that's why. They're just not selling enough stuff. Britain's first Paul Golding admits attack in secret recording. Basically, I think he basically abused his girlfriend, and it's been filmed, and now he admits it. Who'd have thought the leader of Britain First would be a thug? You begin to wonder, don't you? Maybe we would be better off ruled by the political classes, looking at the alternative. And by the way, I love it when Nigel Farage talks about the political classes, the political elite, he calls them, when he is making a lot of money from being one of them. There's a bit of hypocrisy. And Jacob Rees-Mogg does the same thing. I love it when Jacob Rees-Mogg starts talking about the elite without... Jacob, have you looked in a mirror? Have you checked your bank balance? Have you looked at your house and your family and your history and you start talking about the elite. That really is bizarre, isn't it? He's written a book on Victoria, by the way, Victorian England, I should say. And because life was so much simpler, wasn't it, in those days? Yeah, I mean, he must have loved it. People knew their place. You know, the workers were either downstairs making in the kitchen doing work, or they were down the coal mine. And the aristocracy around the world. We did have the elite in those days, and yet we still do. And maybe we should, because look at the alternative. Paul Golding, Tommy Robinson, who silently left the results count in the North West England count for the European elections when he realised he wasn't going to be an MEP. He didn't even get enough votes to get his deposit back. He wasn't as popular as he thought he was, and he would get destroyed in the total perspective vortex. No need for that to destroy his ego, though, because, of course, we just had the European elections and they've just done that to him. So he's going to be quiet for a few days, but I'm sure he'll pop back up again. John Bercow says, I'm staying as Common Speaker. So actually, could we have him as Prime Minister? I think, he's possibly the only one in Parliament who's talking sense lately. He said he wants to stay on because there's too much turmoil. Of course, there was talk that he was going to leave this summer, but I think he thought he was going to leave this summer, thinking that we would already have left the EU by now and things would be starting to settle down. But he's saying there's too much turmoil, not a good time to leave and change Speaker, as well as change Prime Minister. And perhaps have another referendum and another general election. So he might be right on that. And as I say, possibly the only one who's speaking any sense. So maybe, we should have him as Prime Minister. Could there be some rule somewhere? And he would know, of course, what the rules are. That's something that says in a time of complete political turmoil, the Speaker of the House can take charge for as long as is needed. And then he could just argue that there's always political turmoil. He could become our benevolent dictator. And I think he would be fairly benevolent. And he does look like he'd be happy in the shoes of a dictator. And it's probably what Britain deserves now, isn't it? Now it's broken democracy. The birthplace of the Westminster system has shown it can't work anymore. Perhaps it's because Westminster itself is falling apart and is in need of major renovations. Then perhaps, democracy is going the same way. John Bercow is saying he's got no plans to step down as Speaker of the House of Commons despite speculation that he was going to leave this summer. But yes, he would be a good benevolent dictator. He said he would remain in the post while there are what he described as momentous events taking place in Parliament. He said it would not be possible or sensible, I think is the word, to vacate the chair at the moment. And there have been calls for the next speaker, whenever that is, perhaps never, if he does become a dictator, but the next speaker should be a woman. Now, the precedent has been set with Doctor Who and the Prime Minister, of course, and we mustn't forget that. 2 times we've had a woman Prime Minister, but it's not worked out well in either case, has it? One couldn't negotiate a way out of an expensive pair of brown leather trousers. The other one, not that you'd want to think about that prospect. The other one, of course, was going completely gaga at the end and inviting South American dictators round for tea. So what happens to the Brexit party after Brexit? This is what we want to know. There's no way the Brexit party is going to stick together after Brexit because they are diametrically opposed, aren't they? We've got Anne Widdecombe, for example, as much of a as they can come, opposed to lesbian rights and gay rights and abortion, supports the reintroduction of the death penalty as right as they come, versus Claire Fox, a former member of the Revolutionary Communist Party. She published the magazine Living Marxism. And they, look, if you got both of those on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which of course Anne Widdecombe was on, they would have killed each other. But now they and others of equal opposites politically are these very strange bedfellows in the Brexit party, basically because nobody cares who is in the Brexit party. Nigel Farage is leading it. And, just as long as they had someone there for people to vote for, it doesn't matter what those people stand for. Let's just take a grab bag of people who just happen to be available at the time. If they don't get their way, of course, then they will have to stay in the EU. They'll get paid a salary by the one organisation they don't want to be part of. It's a bit like getting a job, refusing to take it, but still expecting to be paid after you've decided not to take it. But on that basis, no need for a manifesto because you are already in. So it doesn't really matter that everyone disagrees with each other because there's nowhere in the world you'd get a manifesto that everyone would be happy with. If they tried it, the whole thing is going to fall apart. So there we are. And that's why it would be a tragedy if the Brexit Party won a general election, because we have no idea what they stand for apart from leaving the EU. And that's why almost certainly it won't happen. But Nigel Farage is adamant if there is no Brexit by the end of October, there will be another election and he will win it. What planet is he on? And it's the total perspective vortex. It gives you a deluded sense of your own self-worth. He refutes the claim that Remain came out better from the EU elections, even though the Brexit Party and UKIP got about 32% of the vote and the Remain parties all added together got over 40%. If you tell that to a Brexiteer, they go crazy. They hate it. They claim it's not the truth. But if we exclude Labour and Tory from either side, which you'd have to, because who knows what those parties stand for. If we exclude them, then that is it. 32% voting to Remain, 40% got that the other way around. 32% voted to leave and 40% voted to remain. If we look at the parties that were almost single issue parties, really, in this election, I don't think people were voting Lib Dem for anything other than the fact that Lib Dem said that we want to remain. And we have to assume that those voting Tories were a bit of a mix. They wanted to leave with a deal, and those who voted Labour just wanted to sit on the fence for a while longer till they got splinters up their bum. But Nigel Farage points to a poll conducted by Lord Ashcroft, a Tory peer of 10,280 UK voters in the European elections. It's interesting stuff. It shows that of those who voted Brexit, obviously, most came from those who voted UKIP in the 2017 general election, but more than half of those who voted Tory in that election voted Brexit this time around. Half of those who voted Tory in the last election voted Brexit this time around. Only 21% voted Tory again in the EU election, and 23% of the Tory voters from 2017 voted for parties that were advocating a second referendum this time. So there we are. That tells us how the Tory vote was decimated. Most went to Brexit, but a chunk of them, almost a quarter of them, went to parties that basically wanted to remain. On the Labour side, of those who voted Labour in the general election, only 13% voted Brexit this time around, as opposed to the half from the Tory party. 38% stuck with Labour, and 45% voted for parties wanting a second referendum. So that tells us two things, doesn't it? First of all, the Tories really are buggered. I mean, they lost more than half their voters to Brexit. They might as well go for a hard Brexit, but good luck with that, because the Brexit Party's doing that. And Labour is fundamentally a Remain party. I mean, people either stuck with Labour, presumably in the hope that there will be a second referendum, but 45%, almost half of them, went to those parties wanting a second referendum. So if Jeremy Corbyn is smart, and the jury is still out on that one, isn't it? He'd get off the fence, and if another general election is called for, he should be demanding a second referendum. He will pick up all those people who went on to the Liberal Democrats and all the other parties. By the way, the Labour and Tory voters who didn't move their vote, they didn't move because they said they always vote for that party. So they're bolted on. It doesn't necessarily mean they agree with the position of their party if they can figure out what it is, which in the case of Labour and Tories is who knows what. And I've heard Nigel Farage banging on about this survey, but he selectively picks the bits he wants. And maybe that's what I'm doing. But this is interesting. Of those who voted, and there's lots of numbers in here. I know numbers don't always work particularly well on radio or on podcasts, but let's go through it. Of those who voted the Lib Dems, 58% said it was because they had the best policy on Brexit. 10% said because they wanted to show their dissatisfaction with the UK government. But the majority are saying, yep, it's because of their policy on Brexit. In other words, we want a second referendum. Those voting for the Brexit Party, only 37% said they did it because they had the best policy on Brexit. Only 37%. Their policy on Brexit is to get out with no deal. only 37% of the people who voted Brexit said